Juno is probably the best support in the game, and no, I'm not talking about power, I'm talking about design. I'm not gonna waste your time with surface level tips and descriptions about what a kit does, because you've already watched that Car Q video, and let's be real, we all have. Instead, I want to give my insight as a semi-professional tier 3 coach who's been coaching the game for a long time, and I promise you will leave this video with valuable insight that you didn't have before. I think the thing that everyone can agree on is that Juno is very fun to play without being broken or overpowered. She has a relatively low skill floor, meaning she's fairly noob friendly, but she also has a fairly high skill ceiling, due to her mobility and decision making, which we'll talk a bit about later on. Heroes like Illari and Kiriko were very fun on the get-go, but they were also very powerful on release. And obviously, Lifeweaver isn't much fun to play because of how clunky his kit feels, and there hasn't been one time where he's been remotely meta in team play, so there's that. Design is probably the most important part to nail down here because it takes a lot of time to rework entire abilities and do complete rehauls, so thankfully they got this bit down for the most part. She definitely needs some tuning. I think she does need to be able to headshot, but the multiplier should be 1.5x so that it's not completely broken. Her flight also feels a bit clunky because you can't move up or down, so many people have been saying that it should function like an Echo Flight or a Mercy Valkyrie. The thing is, the devs have probably thought about these parts of Juno's kit before, because allowing Juno to headshot or to fly around like Echo was probably a bit too OP in their own testing. I think the argument for keeping her verticality limited is that it separates her from other supports, particularly Lucio, Kiriko and Baptiste. We'll get onto the Lucio comparisons as we talk about compositions later, but if the devs feel that Juno is a bit too weak in playtesting, then added verticality in her glide would be very welcome. Now, in terms of whether Juno is a main support or a flex support, we first need to define what clarifies a main support or flex support. Here's Coach Coffee, a tier 2 pro coach, explaining what the difference is.
Flex support, you need to aim to get your macro value. Easiest way for me to put it. Now, you might have arguments like Moira. What about Moira? You don't need to aim at Moira. You can be brain dead and play Moira. You need to remember that the actual bind for Moira's primary fire is, in fact, the heals. So if you view it like that, Moira's entire toolkit is primarily healing and then aiming to get the heal resource once again.
So again, if we apply that to Mercy, her macro value is in her damage boost, which you don't need mechanics to aim with. On Brig, it's your repair packs and defensive utility. On Lifeweaver, it's your healing and grip, both of which are lock-ons. And on Lucio, it's obviously your speed, which is a passive AoE ability. You can think of macro value as why you play a certain hero. So what is it on Juno? Why play her? Well, this is where it gets a bit difficult because we haven't had the ability to playtest Juno in team or scrim environments, as well as in high ranked environments too. In short, if the macro value of Juno comes from her hyper ring and torpedoes, she's leaning towards that main support direction. But if the macro value of Juno comes down to her gun, then she's leaning towards the flex support direction. And we just don't know yet what direction she's leaning in. If I had to make a prediction, I would say she's leaning towards main supports. Now, I know people like Confusion, renowned Twitter celebrity, and tier 3 main support have said that she doesn't feel like she gives competition to Lucio, but keeping in mind that 95% of Juno gameplay over the next 3 days will be by casual players in quick play and not in team play environments at the professional level, I think it's too early to call that. I have seen some people call Juno an Ana with mobility.
She's just a flex support, like I said, she's just like Ana, but without her healing. Yeah.
She's like Ana if Ana invested in a wheelchair.
Like, exactly.
Powered up wheelchair.
Exactly.
But again, Ana's macro value is from her nade. Juno has none of that, she just does damage, healing and a speed boost. Now onto Juno's backline support pairings. The first is assuming that Juno is a flex support and will replace a Kiriko or Baptiste or Ana in your composition. The second is assuming that Juno is a main support and is going to replace the Lucio or Brig or Mercy in your comp. I was going to tier list this, but it's just so early to do it and we need more time, so I want to make this a bit more discussion based rather than a didactic ranking. Now, assuming that Juno is a flex support, the most obvious pairing I want to go over is Lucio-Juno. The 3 most popular comps with Lucio at the moment is the Lucio Kiri Winston Rush Dive comps, the Lucio Kiri Queen or Lucio Kiri Mauga comps, and the Lucio Bap Ram comps. Starting with the first and saying that Juno does replace Kiriko in this comp, do I see this as being more viable than the Kiriko version? Well, not really, unfortunately. The Suzu just provides so much utility to help cleanse stuff like Nade, but more than that, Kiriko has way more verticality than Juno, meaning on maps with more high ground, like a Colosseo for example, there's less of a reason to play Juno. Everyone in this comp already has mobility as well, so you don't really need that hyper ring, and Kiriko's healing is also way more consistent. I don't think it's awful, but Kiriko might just be better. The second one is basically the same comp, but with Mauga or Queen instead. Here I think the Queen or Mauga makes a big difference, because if both teams are playing Lucio Queen and you're playing Juno instead of Kiriko, you're not gonna have that cleanse for Rampage. Queen's hitbox also makes it harder to hit your healing more reliably. In Mauga mirrors, both of those points don't really apply, but Mauga really needs that Suzu to be even remotely viable. There is a clear reason why you only see Mauga or Queen comps with a Kiriko, and that is mainly because of Suzu. The third comp here suffers for similar reasoning. You also don't have nearly as much healing or damage output as Baptiste, and you're missing Lamp. The only redeeming factor is pretty much the high single target healing, and that brawl comps usually specialize in horizontal mobility, which Juno is very strong at, so I could see the double speed boost being most useful here. Now pairing Juno with Brig. Normally Brig is played in one of two comps. Poke brawl stuff with Sigma and Baptiste, also known as anti-dive, or dive comps with Winston and Ana. Starting with the former, I don't think this one is too shabby. Again, you mainly play Sigma Bap Brig against dive comps, and at least according to my anti-dive guide, I could see macro-wise how you could slot in Juno here over the Baptiste. Sure, Juno basically has no sustain or get out of jail free card, but she trades that off with much more mobility and kiting potential with her hyper ring, so I think this one's gonna be map dependent at the end of the day. The second one, I just don't see happening, I'm sorry. Nade is just too powerful to miss out on. Nano Boost also outshines Orbital Ray, especially considering how slow the Ray actually moves. Lastly, we have Mercy. I'll mention Lifeweaver later, don't worry about it. The two comps you'll see Mercy most in is aerial, Saudi Arabian comps with Diva and Farah, and heavy ranged comps with Sigma and Zen. With the first one, there was actually a meme on Twitter about running 5 aerial heroes, and I don't think it's actually that bad. The main thing though is just why not play Kiriko? Like, yeah, Juno is very mobile and can pocket a Diva quite nicely, and Hyper Ring might have some use for enabling your Farah and your Diva, but Suzu Barrage is just necessary in this comp. The next one, replacing Juno with Zen, I mean, this is just awful. Have you seen Juno's fall off? 70% bloods. Yeah, you're never gonna see this one unless the fall off gets drastically reduced, which is not gonna happen. Now onto the second part, treating Juno like a main support and pairing her with Bap, Ana, Kiriko and Illari. Again, I'll mention Moira later. I'm missing out on Moira here, mainly because Kiriko is just better than Moira, and in places where you'd play Moira, again you would just play Kiriko, so the macro should say the same. Starting with Juno Bap. Now this is where it gets interesting, because are you playing Juno here as a replacement for Lucio, or as a replacement for another flex support like Illari or Zen, who are often paired with Baptiste? And the answer to that question is, in my opinion at least, the former. There's two main reasons for that, which is the insane fall-off and the team-wide speed ability. Hyper Ring is only 10% less speed than Speed Amp, and it lasts longer. So what comps do I see with Juno Bap? Well, I see the Juno Bap Ram stuff or Juno Bap Sigma stuff. You can toss in any poke brawl DPS you want here, Sojourn, Cass, Venture, Ashe, Sim, Mei, etc. I'm not gonna edit in those icons by the way, it just takes too long. And again, on flat, open maps with short to medium sightlines, I see this working decently. Nepal Shrine comes to mind here, where you still have that speed to get your tank in, and there isn't too much high ground that somebody like a Lucio would get a big advantage over on you. I still feel Lucio Bap is safer for the most part, especially considering that you're missing out on that sound barrier, and Lucio has more sustain with his self-heal, and he's more flexible on a wider range of maps. The big thing here, I think, is how squishy Juno is, and how much that might impact her. And you'll see that theme coming across with Juno Kiriko. This one's a bit more intriguing because of how flexible Kiriko is. We've seen Lucio Kiriko, we've seen Ana Kiriko, we've seen Bap Kiriko. We've also seen Kiriko being played with a whole bunch of different tanks too, so it's really hard to generalize the strength of Juno Kiriko early on. My biggest worry here is again just how squishy Juno is, because the supports that are played with Kiriko, being Lucio and Bap, all have some kind of self-heal or bailout card. With that being said, on paper, a Queen Kiriko Juno comp does sound pretty decent. Juno Ana should be easier to break down here, because you're only going to be playing this in dive comps. I'd see this comp working like a hybrid between Lucio Ana and Kiriko Ana in dive. And I think Juno Ana would be okay. You still have that hyper ring for speed like Lucio, while still being able to help out those flanks like a Kiriko. The issue is, I just think Juno is mediocre at both of those things. Kiriko especially, I mean, we saw Ana Kiriko Tracer in Pro League before, and Juno just can't do the things that Kiriko can because Kiriko has more consistent healing and a TP through walls. Finishing this off with Juno Illari, we first need to look at who you normally play Illari with, which is Baptiste. If you want a prime example of Illari Bap being played at the highest level, just look at Saudi Arabia from last year. Now, do I think Juno could work in this setup? My answer is not really. The Bap sustain is so useful, not just for himself, but also for his team too. You still have that strong Illari angle, but if you get Dover's Juno and run away, your tank is cooked, simple as. Now I'm actually finishing this off with Lifeweaver and Moira, who I didn't really go over, because they're used so infrequently in team play. Now in ranked, I'm sure you'll be fine with these guys, as you will be with any support pairing, because it's ranked. You guys can let me know your thoughts about these two down below. So to summarize, I think Juno is the second best hero we've had to Overwatch 2, just behind Venture. To those saying that she lacks a clear identity, just hold your horses and give her more time. My gut feeling is that she feels like a hybrid between Lucio and Kiriko, with her clear strengths being in horizontal mobility, but her clear weaknesses being in her sustain and her lack of bullshit utility like a Suzu or Lamp. As always, let me know your thoughts down below, and if I gave you some insight that you didn't have before this video, consider sharing it with your friends or getting my coaching, because my brain is very big. Until next time.